It's 2025, and that means it's the Chinese Year of the Snake. The snake is said to bring wisdom, transformation, and resilience. And in Chinese astrology, it represents growth, adaptability, and patience. Something that we, as a new channel, need a lot of. So to celebrate the Chinese Year of the Snake, I thought we'd go through my top 5 favourite snakes here in my reptile room. So, to kick things off, coming in at number 5 is the mangrove snake. Now, obviously, it wouldn't be a proper top 5 without at least one mildly venomous danger noodle, and the mangrove snake is probably one of my favourites. Also known as the golden-ringed cat snake, this rear-fanged venomous colubrid is endemic to Southeast Asia. It possesses not insignificant venom, but there have been no recorded deaths from bites that we're aware of. Because of this, they used to sit on the more paperworky side of the DWA list, although they were declassified in 2007, opening them up to more keepers like you and me. Not that that means you should go out and just buy one without doing your research. They're not for everyone. What's also not insignificant is their size, getting to around 8 or 9 feet, making them one of the largest cat snake species around. So be prepared to offer them plenty of space, both horizontally and vertically. The best part about these snakes? They're arboreal. Now, I love arboreal animals. I love arboreal snakes, arboreal lizards, arboreal tarantulas. In fact, I think probably every animal can be made better by just making it arboreal. But we are getting a little bit sidetracked. Oh, did I forget to mention, they also swim. Now, these snakes are absolute stunners. That jet black coloration almost shimmers like an oil slick in the right light, and those golden yellow bands stretching down their body scream absolute danger. And they are more than happy to demonstrate that danger should you piss one off. A lot of people classify these guys as aggressive. I think they're just a bit misunderstood, or something. But they definitely are grumpy. Now, with every great snake comes downsides, and with the mangrove snake, that's getting them to eat. They're incredibly fussy and are more than happy to go on long hunger strikes should they get stressed out. Be prepared to stock up on things like frog's legs. I've tried to wean mine onto frozen thawed mice, but to no avail. Despite all this, they are still awesome snakes, and if you're thinking about one day keeping venomous, maybe these could be the perfect start for you. And at number 4 is the Amazon tree boa. Now, this little firecracker of a noodle is one amazing snake, and one of the more docile of the 3-lettered acronym tree snakes. Endemic to the rainforests of, well, the Amazon, you'll find these little guys tucked up in the trees. It does seem to be a bit of a running theme with this list, but yes, it is another arboreal tree snake. Enclosure-wise, you have full reign over doing a fully planted, bioactive, tropical rainforest enclosure that will make an amazing centerpiece in any home. Now, they are a more medium-sized snake, somewhere around 5 or 6 feet, and they are on the slender side, so the enclosure doesn't need to be enormous, but definitely something that favours height over ground space. Now, of course, being a rainforest snake, these guys do like it hot and humid, so keep the temps up and keep the humidity to around 60 to 80%. Now, one great thing with the Amazon tree boa is the variety of colours you can get. The garden variety comes in your traditional greens and browns, while fancier morphs come in bright oranges and yellows, which would definitely make a great display piece. So again, the downsides. These guys are food motivated, and while it's not necessarily a downside, it does mean that if you're going to handle this snake, you're very likely to get bitten. Although it's nothing in comparison to their emerald cousins. They can be tamed down over time. It is possible with some patience and some hard work, but it can be a challenge. But don't let that stop you getting an awesome display snake. At number 3 is a relatively new species for me, the Mandarin rat snake. Now, if your first thought isn't, my god, that's the most beautiful snake I've ever seen in my life, you really need to give your head a wobble, because this is probably one of the most beautiful snakes I've ever seen in my life. Despite this bright coloration though, this is actually a non-venomous colubrid, endemic to the Asia regions, if you couldn't tell by its name. They're a relatively small species and make an ideal pet for somebody who's got space constraints and can't fit an 8-foot vivarium. To be honest, these guys are pretty full of plus points. They're small, they're docile, they're reluctant to bite. They're also diurnal, which means they'll be out more in the daytime, meaning you'll actually get to enjoy them. Because of the mountainous regions that these guys originate, they prefer things on the cooler side than most other snakes. They're still exothermic, but you're only looking at temperatures in the 24 to 25. And if anything, with these guys, excessive heat is far more dangerous than excessive cold. Build yourself a nice, cool, damp, forest-themed enclosure, and this snake will thrive, giving you an amazing snake that you can actually interact with on a day-to-day basis. So, at number 2, coming from a snake that you want to interact with to a snake that I don't want to put my hand anywhere near, the green tree python. Now, this might seem like a bit of an odd choice for a top 5 list, especially at the number 2 slot, but bear with me. I mean, they're fussy, fragile, bad-tempered, they don't do a whole lot, they're really expensive. Not attributes most people look for in a great snake. But given all that, there's just something there that makes me absolutely adore them. To me, they're a bit like owning a Ferrari. Not that I own a Ferrari, but it's what I imagine owning one would feel like. They're ludicrously expensive, wildly impractical, and you know that eventually one day you'll end up wrapped around a tree. But you know you still want one. All those negatives are just overshadowed by the sheer badassery of them. And then you take a step back and you look at them and you remember why you have a green tree python. Those smooth scales, the bulging head, those heat pits all across the face, that robust body and the way they're just sat there looking menacingly, waiting to snatch a bird out of the sky. Aside from getting an emerald tree boa, you're not going to get anything cooler. These guys have an amazing party trick. When they're babies, they're a gorgeous deep red or a bright yellow, and then slowly changing to that traditional green through ontogenetic colour change. Although deep down, part of me kind of wishes they stayed that deep red colour. Now, we're not talking a huge snake, somewhere in the region of 4.5 or 5.5 foot, depending on if it's male or female. And while they'll spend most of their day curled up, hoping that eventually you'll take your nose away from the glass and leave them alone for 30 seconds, at night is when they come alive, and they will use every inch of the enclosure that you give them. Now, of course, the downsides. They are quite prone to dehydration, especially as a baby, so regular misting is key. And keeping those temperatures and humidities in the right range for them can be a little bit of a challenge initially. They want reasonably high humidities, but they don't want a sopping wet enclosure either, so a little bit of care is required. Obviously, again, they are considered fairly aggressive, defensive. Leave them alone, they're perfectly happy. We're talking about a snake with a bit of an attitude and is all too happy to strike out when you put your hand in the enclosure. One thing we haven't really talked about is make sure you get a captive bred specimen. Don't be lured in by those cheaper wild caught ones. You'll have a far better time with them. So before we get to the number 1 spot, there's a couple of honourable mentions who didn't quite make the list. Firstly, the children's python. Now, don't worry, their favourite meal isn't children. Quite the opposite, in fact. They're actually one of the smallest species of python around. Getting to just around 2 or 3 feet long, they make another ideal snake for somebody who's got space constraints. They're perfect eaters and they're easily handleable, if not a little bit wriggly. All in all, they make great pet snakes. And they were in fact my first snake, which is why I have a little bit of a soft spot for them. Secondly, the Pueblan milk snake. This is another non-venomous colubrid, although you'd be forgiven for mistaking these guys for something a little spicier. They definitely scream, danger, danger, I'm a coral snake, but it's all bluff. Another amazing snake and a great snake for your next step up from something beginner like a corn snake. They have great temperaments, they eat really well, and they're easily handleable by the most inexperienced of keepers. So finally, at my number 1 spot is the Vietnamese Blue Beauty rat snake. The clue really is in the name with this one. These are one of the most beautiful snakes out there, and is my absolute favourite in my reptile room. It's almost like these guys couldn't decide what sort of patterning they wanted, so they thought, let's have all of it. The prominent eyeshadow and the iridescent gleam on their heads flowing down into their sort of more subtle, patternless section. They then go all Art Deco with a diamond pattern running down their middle before finishing off with stripes at the very end. Obviously endemic to the Asia region, these guys live in subtropical to tropical areas, tucked away in little nooks and caves where things are a little cooler and drier. These snakes have a savage feeding response. Mine's never turned down a meal. It also makes them quite curious. They will come out and explore and see what's going on when you're bagging around and tending to their enclosure. They'll let you know though if they're not in the mood for playtime. They're quick to lash out and they will waggle their tail and channel their inner rattlesnake if they're annoyed. With a lot of work and regular handling, they can be tamed down, but they still have a bit of a reputation as a cantankerous snake. Not something I'd particularly recommend for a beginner keeper anyway. They also grow pretty big, somewhere in the region of 7, 8, maybe even 10 feet long in some cases, so they're going to need a fairly decent sized enclosure, somewhere where they can explore both horizontally and again vertically. Yep, you guessed it, it's another arboreal snake on my list. Give them plenty of things to climb and lots of areas to squeeze themselves into to feel safe. And like with the Mandarin rat snake, keep things on the cooler side. Their only main downside is they're not particularly readily available over here. They can be found with enough searching. There are a few breeders that I know of, but you're looking at around £250 or £300 for a proper captive bred snake. But with enough searching, you should be able to find one of the coolest snakes in the world. So there you have it, my top 5 favourite snakes here in the reptile room. This was definitely a difficult list to make, as quite frankly all of them deserve to be at the number 1 spot, but I did feel a little bit like cheating. Do you disagree with any of them? Probably the green tree python. Why not head down to the comments and let me know what your top 5 favourite snakes are. But for now though, that's it for this video. We will see you real soon with our next top 5 list. Something there that makes me absolutely... Hello. What's that? In for a cuddle. Oh.